So I want to thank you, Pete, for taking the time to talk to me today about your journal in your journey in evolutionary thinking and your HBES experiences.
Okay.
All right. So I have a few questions for you. The first one I have is for people who may not know you particularly well or may not have heard you talk at a conference. In what discipline did you earn your doctorate, and when did you really begin thinking about human behavior from an evolutionary perspective? And who or what prompted you to do so?
Well, I was trained as an ecologist, and I studied lakes for many years. So that was my background. I had a fair amount of coursework in evolution as a biologist, and so I had a course in evolution from a fellow named Ledyard Stebbins, who was a botanist that figured in the Neo-Darwinian synthesis, and another course from Jim Valentine, who was a paleontologist who had a lot of innovative ideas about evolution in the 60s and 70s. So that was my background, and then I got interested in humans and cultural evolution basically through teaching a course. When I was a freshman faculty member, one of my colleagues was a sociologist, and I was hired into an interdisciplinary teaching unit, and so about half my colleagues were social scientists. And he wanted me to help him teach a course that he'd put on the books called Principles of Human Ecology. So I agreed to do that, and so I went off to the library looking for information on cultural evolution. I knew that there were these people who called themselves cultural ecologists, Pete Vida and Skip Rappaport. They were anthropologists, and there was a pretty lively bunch of guys at that time. And so I went to the library looking up their stuff and stuff that they referred to, and hunting around for somebody who had anything remotely mechanistic to say about cultural evolution. And the only thing I could find at the time, I missed a couple of things, but the only thing I could find at the time was an essay written by Donald Campbell, it was what I call a programmatic essay. Basically, it said, we can study cultural evolution using the same concepts and tools that we use to study genetic evolution. So he didn't go too much beyond that, although he had invented one important concept which he called vicarious selectors, which the idea is that psychological mechanisms act as like selection. They sort of stand in for selection. This would be true of any system of phenotypic flexibility that use the nervous system or other biological systems to adapt to variable environments. And culture is influenced by those things as well as by things like natural selection and random variation. So he had a kind of a sketch, and so I used that to write a lecture for this course. And I was teaching another course at the same time with Rob Boyd, and we felt it talking about this. And eventually we decided there was a research project there.
Mm-hmm. Did you find those early days, so when maybe, when you and Boyd were first working on this, or even before that, did you find it an intellectually sort of lonely time, or did you feel that you had sort of a sense of sort of a built-in community?
Well, there were very few people working on those kind of problems in those days. So Don Campbell became a strong supporter of ours, for example, but there weren't very many people. And as the sociobiology controversy bloomed, then people tended to fall into it's either genes, all genes or all culture. And so if you were we sometimes felt like we were in no man's land with taking incoming from both sides.
Right. That's not an ideal position to be at times. So would you say that your sort of key supporter at that time then was Don Campbell?
Yeah.
Okay. Was there anybody else in those early days that you can think of that was starting to be supportive, or who was keen on the idea of looking at cultural aspects of things but within an evolutionary framework?
Well, the other people who were working hard on that problem were Luca Cavalli-Sforza and Mark Feldman at Stanford. And Rob and I sat in on a seminar they taught in 1977 or 78, and so we learned about the sort of population genetical approach to culture from those guys. So they were the other most active team. There were another half dozen or so people that a fellow named Ted Cloak and some other people who were thinking roughly along the same lines. And then, of course, E.O. Wilson was thinking along somewhat similar lines, and so his book with Charles Lumsden in 1981 wasn't that? No, 1981.
Yeah, it was early 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but they had quite different ideas than Rob and I did. We always thought of culture as a kind of an evolutionarily active thing, and E.O. Wilson was basically, when it came down to it, he was kind of a genetic reductionist. I mean, he wanted everything to cash out in terms of genes in the end.
So if you were asked to articulate sort of what kinds of obstacles you think you faced in pursuing that kind of perspective on human behavior, what would you say? Were there particular things that were problems for you?
Well, it was hard to get papers published, and it was hard to get grant money.
Sure.
Everyone had a fatal objection to the kind of thing we were doing. Somebody, so in a paper you couldn't sort of plug all the holes. So our 85 book was a big success, much bigger success than any of the papers had been, because then we could sort of plug all the holes. I mean, we could explain all the pieces, and then a lot of people were willing to go along when they could see that their fatal objection wasn't so fatal after all.
So in terms of the contributions you believe have had the biggest impact on our field, would you put that book then up amongst them?
Yeah. So that it was a pretty highly mathematical book, so we had a lot of models in it. But it was also, we pulled together a lot of empirical work from developmental psychology, for example, and in that book. So we, it has a pretty good citation, so I think it was influential. Yeah.
Sure. Is there anything else that you would include in that? Any other contributions in particular that you think have had a big impact?
Well, there are a lot of things that aren't in that book. So so there are models of punishment, for example, and we have some models of indirect reciprocity that I think were important, showing what the difficulties with indirect reciprocity. And then we've over the years tackled a whole slew of special topics. I guess human cooperation is the biggest one in a series of papers over the years, and other things as well. So the connection between Pleistocene climate and the evolution of cultures is an example of an area that we've contributed several papers, book chapters.
Okay. If you had to give an example of, or sort of articulate whether you thought there was any contribution that you made that you think was overlooked, so something that you felt should have had a bigger impact than it has, at least currently.
No, I don't think I can think of any that haven't had at least some impact. I don't think there's anything that's completely forgotten.
Okay, that sat there uncited. Yeah. Okay. If you had the chance to rewrite any of your papers or books, would you? And if you would, in what way would you change them?
Well, one of the things that we considered putting into the 85 book and decided there wasn't enough evidence to make it credible was a highly variable environment, and that might explain the evolution of human culture. There were, in those days, only a few ice cores, for example, and a few marine cores that were high enough resolution to pick out the variability. So a few paleoclimatologists had noticed that some of the variation in for example, the Greenland ice core record seemed to be much larger in the Pleistocene than in the late Pleistocene, in the last glacial, than in the Holocene. But the cores were from near the edge of the ice sheet, and there were lots of problems with those cores. So it wasn't until the late 80s that the famous cores from the ice divide were raised, and then by the early 90s we had a clear picture of all the high amplitude, high frequency variation in the last glacial, and so we could have speculated a little bit more about that, and then we'd have been right. So we did. So we weren't bold enough, I think, to extrapolate beyond this very flimsy evidence that existed.
But nice to know that you had it right in the first place.
Yeah, but if you didn't say it to anybody, well, you might as well not have had the idea. That's the rule, right, of science. If you don't publish, you might as well not have thought it.
Right. If you were going to give some advice to students who came to you who were thinking about entering the field of evolutionary psychology, anthropology, who are trying to approach human behavior from an adaptationist perspective today, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, take good courses in evolution. I think that's important. I don't think everybody has as good a background in evolution as they should. I mean, if it were up to me, I wouldn't let anybody study social science unless they had a good background in biology.
Sure, if you don't have the sort of basic, background behind it, then you're going to leave yourself open to a lot of mistakes that you might make that you wouldn't have made otherwise. I actually think there are a fair number of us, that myself included, who took biology undergraduate degrees, and then took one class that was like an evolutionary class or a sociobiology class, and we just kind of got sucked right in.
Yeah.
We're sort of primed by the evolutionary biology background. Any other advice other than to get good grounding in the basics?
Well, I think that it's always good to have a sort of a portfolio of research. Pick some risky areas and work on that, but also have some more, particularly for young people, some things that you can do that you can get published in and earn tenure and so on. If your wild ideas don't pan out,
sure.
don't put all your eggs in one basket, I guess.
Right. I think that's very good advice. This is the 25th anniversary of HBES, and it was one of the reasons for coming up with this idea of going and interviewing people who've been involved from the very early days. And so I wanted to ask you a bit about the role that you played in the early days of HBES, your time on the executive council, things like that.
Okay, well, let's see, my first participation was in the, it's hard to know, I can't remember whether, I think it's the first official year of HBES, or it followed a meeting that was held at Northwestern or something the year before, when people decided to establish the society.
Okay, was that the meeting when people talked about Hamilton being acclaimed president? Was that time?
I can't remember exactly how that worked. I'd have to go back and review the records. Okay. But at some point we had an election, and Hamilton was the first president. Yeah. Since then the elections have been held before just before the annual meeting. So it could have been that that's how it operated, or it could have been that it was subsequent to that first sort of official meeting that we had the election. I just don't remember. Yeah. And
go ahead.
And then the first real service I did for the society was on the 10th anniversary of the founding. And my colleagues at Davis ran the meeting, the annual meeting, and that led later to me to Margot Wilson asking me to run for treasurer, so I was the treasurer for 6 years, and then the presidency for another 6 years. But I wasn't really active in service to the HBES in the very early days.
Where were you during those early days? Were you in California?
Yeah, I'm Davis.
At that point? Right, okay. So that was part of it too. Sounds like a lot of the early activity was around Northwestern and Michigan, and then some of the people that were at Harvard, and then it sort of slowly, sort of spread out, and people started getting in better touch and better connections with people in other parts of the country after that point.
Yeah, I guess that's right. So people like Bill Irons and Martin and Margot were stalwarts in the early days of the society. Yeah,
sure.
And their students.
Yeah. So when you think about sort of those earlier meetings and what HBES is like today, is there anything that surprised you about the evolution of HBES itself over the last 25 years?
No, I don't think so. I think there were fewer psychologists in the early days and more anthropologists, and so the relative growth of psychology in the mix of people is a change, I think. I don't know if the statistics would exactly bear me out or not.
I haven't seen that sort of breakdown of the membership. I know they were talking at this last meeting about the increase in biologists, the recent increase in biologists. But I had that feeling too, even from the very first meetings that I went to, which would have been, I think, around 93, 94, that it did seem to me that it was almost seemed like it was half and half, anthropologists and then psychologists and some biologists and other assorted areas. And that does seem to have had a shift. I mean, I suspect the field season thing has something to do with how many people are showing up at the meetings.
Right. That complicates things a bit for anthropologists.
Yes.
And I guess there have been relatively few biologists associated with the HBES over the years, people with their main training in biology. So if we get more, that's probably a good thing.
A good thing, yeah, I agree. In what directions would you hope that HBES itself or its researchers, what sort of directions would you hope that they go in the future? Are there particular topics that you feel that we still haven't paid enough attention to, things that you think are still unexplored?
Well, I think from a cultural evolutionist point of view, that one of the things that we have far too little of is the actual study of evolution. In evolutionary biology, the sort of gold standard investigation is something like Peter and Rosemary Grant's study of the evolution of the beak of the finch, right? So that kind of basic microevolutionary study is still fairly seldom conducted. It's not easy to do, but we still don't have a beak of the finch kind of study we can point to and say this is the way it ought to be done.
Sure.
And that's been after World War II, particularly after the advent of starch gel electrophoresis and other ways of getting your hands on genes and genetic variation. Those kind of studies have proliferated.
Sure.
So John Edler's book in the mid-'80s, I don't forget now how big a sample of studies he had, but over 100 studies of genetic microevolution in the field that met his standards of quality, and that's what we ought to be aiming for in my branch of things.
Right.
And I think the other thing that is beginning to happen and is important is more synthesis between the anthropology, psychology, and evolutionary biology of humans. That's all wound up together, and the the division between evolutionary psychology and human behavioral ecology and cultural evolution is to the extent that it still is divided, it's unfortunate, it seems to me.
I agree. There was a time when I was a student where there was a lot of debate about that sort of division and discussions about how we should be doing our work and what was the best way to approach the questions. And it seems like while the debate disappeared, some of those divisions didn't. I mean, there's still a gap between the two in terms of the true interdisciplinary aspect of HBS. I mean, that's one of the things that I think a lot of people think is really great about it. And you go to a conference and you have anthropologists and you have people who study political science and the law and criminal behavior and all sorts of different things and biologists all together. And yet they still don't always really tie everything together in the way that they probably should. And I think that's something we probably should really be working for.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, exactly.
Again, one of the things that Barry Kuhl and I, who started talking about these ideas a year ago at HBS, were really reflecting on was the fact that a lot of people that we knew that had been influential people in the history of the society, including people like Bill Hamilton and George Williams, Margaret Wilson, David Rowe, that they're no longer with us, and that the students that come to the meetings today are never going to have the opportunity to interact with them and to hear them talk, and they may read their works, but they don't really have that sense of them as people in the way that some of us who were students when they were here have. Do you have any memories of your interactions with any of them at early conferences that you'd care to share with the newer generation of researchers?
Oh, I don't know. They were all big personalities in their own way. So Hamilton and George Williams were both exceedingly shy men. Rob Boyd tells a story of being in a cocktail party or something and being stuck between these two guys, trying to make a conversation happen. And so it was agonizing because both these guys stared at their feet, and it was hard to get a word out of them in an informal context. And Hamilton was funny. He was in a lecture he could be very humorous, but his delivery of his jokes was terrible. So he had this deadpan delivery of his jokes, and nobody got the jokes.
Oh no! The students were all just sitting there looking.
Everybody is expecting pearls of wisdom, not jokes, and he didn't. Well, there's an art which I don't have to telling jokes well, and it's a matter of timing and emphasis, and Bill wasn't going to make it on the stand-up comic circuit.
Right. Right. I can see that. Well, I just want to give you another opportunity. If there's anything else that you feel like you would like to share, or that you think is sort of good advice for the young students or the next generation of people there, I just want to give you a chance to share it.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Pete, for taking the time to talk to me this afternoon and to share this interview with other researchers in the field.
My pleasure.
Thank you.